new money versus old money.
So you can't inherit debt, but the debt has to be paid from the estate.
Obviously, this Maid Wars backdrop is going on. I've got a folder with "If I Die, Start Here" on the front of it.
Welcome to Show Me the Money podcast that's more Whistledown than wealth management. I'm Ellie.
And I'm Claire, and each week we discuss how money shows up in some of our favourite pop culture, from the classic to the nostalgic to the contemporary.
And this week we are heading back a few hundred years to talk all about Bridgerton.
Yes, I've been so keen to talk about Bridgerton because I think there's so much interesting money stuff in there. And normally when we talk about Regency era or sort of historical fiction, we would normally be talking about class.
Yes.
And so we were kind of keen to avoid that this time, although we will touch on the kind of old money, new money situation. But we just, there are a few distinct plot lines that we thought would be really, really good to talk through. But also, I'm very much on a Bridgerton vibe at the minute. As we record, the first half of season 4 is out. We're waiting for the second half to come out. I think when this drops, we'll be just after the second half. So just bear in mind that we know what happens in the first half of season 4, but not in the second.
That's actually a good point. It's a good reminder that if you don't want spoilers for the first half of the season, then maybe come back to this episode after.
Yeah, although there's not that much to spoil.
No.
I think a lot of people kind of know the rough premise of what season 4 is. It's basically Cinderella. So really it is kind of a retelling of Cinderella, but with slightly more finger banging on the stairs. Spoiler alert. Yeah, it's kind of a retelling of Cinderella, but that's not the main thing that we want to talk about to do with season 4. So for anyone who maybe doesn't watch Bridgerton currently, I actually didn't start watching it until season 3, and then I just watched all of the first 2 and then season 3, mostly because I'm such a Nicola Coughlan stan. And I was like, if I'm going to watch it, I have to watch it from the start. And I have to say, I feel like it's got better. I've enjoyed it more as time's gone on.
Yeah. Which is quite rare, actually. I feel like most of the time things get worse the longer they go, whereas actually with this, they've managed to keep it fresh.
I think actually maybe a better way of saying it is that I found the 2 leads very annoying in the first series, and then I really like all of the leads from that point on. Absolutely no offense to them, but they just both really got under my skin. And one of the storylines that we want to talk about is from season 1. So Bridgerton is sort of semi-historical fiction. I mean, you get quite a lot in the soundtrack. It's quite a lot of anachronisms. I saw someone pointing out the other day that there was something covering up someone's ear piercing. I was like, they have orchestral versions of Taylor Swift in the background. This is not where we're looking for our historical accuracy.
I was going to say, I think one of the things that's quite funny about Bridgerton that I like is that it's not your traditional BBC period drama where it's very serious.
No,
it's much more fun.
It's like a soap opera. It's because it's a Shondaland production, and this is what Shonda Rhimes does so well. She does it with Grey's Anatomy. She did it with Revenge, with How to Get Away with Murder. All of those, they're all just so good. We might have to do a Shondaverse episode because it's all so bonkers. I just love it. But so it's set in London in the Regency era. It's actually mostly filmed in Bath, where I live. So quite often it'll be Lady Danbury's house, and I'll be like, oh, there's the Holborn Museum, or whatever. I think the Featherington house is number 1 The Crescent, which is actually open. You can go and have a look around.
That's cool.
So yeah, it has sentimental appeal to me for that reason as well. But it kind of follows main character, a kind of ensemble cast of characters who are kind of conducting their business around the ton, which I still don't really know what that means. But yeah, it's kind of focuses in on like the social season. So we don't see people in the in-between. There's usually like a a head couple that it tells their love story of, but then there's all of these peripheral characters and plots. And I think what we want to talk about is some of those like B plots that are really interesting. The first of which happens in season 1. So we have like the Bridgertons, who are kind of like really maybe like they're like the top dogs, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's Violet Bridgerton's the head of the household. But her husband, the dad, has passed away from a bee sting like some years previously. She's got 8 children. Their names, it's very twee. Their names are like according to the letters of the alphabet. So there's like Anthony, Benedict, Colin.
To be honest though, if I had 8 children, I think I would have to have a way of remembering them like that. So I kind of respect that.
You know, see what's the face with the 22 children?
Yeah.
I genuinely, I do have ADHD, but I don't think I'd remember all their names.
No
I'd
chance.
have to have some sort of like
You'd have to have a
mnemonic.
system. Yeah.
And that's almost too many for the alphabet.
How many letters are in the alphabet? 26, yeah. Oh my gosh.
So yeah, but kind of they're like the top dogs. They are like very, very wealthy, very well to do, and you know, lots of the things that happen is like, oh my gosh, like the Bridgerton family are gonna fall from grace. And they're very like, I guess, old money, I suppose, and they're very sophisticated. They're very elegant. They're very poised, even though, you know, they get up to loads of shenanigans. And then we've got the Featheringtons, which is in the beginning is Lord and Lady Featherington. I'm going to have to say Featherington so many times. I'm going to trip over it every time. Sorry, listeners. So we've got the Lord and Lady, Portia, and can't remember his name. Doesn't really matter. He's not in it for very long. Played by the brilliant Ben Miller. And they're kind of the heads of the household. They've got 3 daughters. So, you know, like we talked about in the Pride and Prejudice episode, this is like a tricky situation for them to be in. And they're very, very like brash. They dress in like these super bright, like acid bright colours, like really kind of showy, really tacky,
Flashy,
I suppose. And are sort of looked down on, I suppose we would say. And I think this is where this like new money versus old money kind of thing comes in. Like, you know, they do get some looks and stuff like that. And we did, when we were doing our prep, like sort of compare them to like the Peltzes and the Beckhams.
Yeah, I think it's a
like,
very good comparison.
Yeah. Well, obviously it's also very timely with all of the drama that has gone on between those two families, which we should definitely do a Substack on, because I think there's loads of like money and class stuff.
Yeah, it's like you can have as much money as you want, but you can't buy your way into a higher class.
Yeah, but also like I think it's a bit more reciprocal there, because the Peltzes didn't have like the level of like fame that the Beckhams have enjoyed. And so I think it might have been that there was like, they might have initially thought there might be some sort of like pooling of their assets, but obviously that's not how it's worked out. But back to the Featheringtons, they have like Lord Featherington, they're obviously living this like quite lavish lifestyle. They have like a household with servants. Their long-standing servant Varley we will talk about in like the next little bit. But you know, they have ladies' maids. They're very well to do. It's just that they're a little bit, they wear their wealth kind of a bit more ostentatiously.
Yeah.
The head of the household, unbeknownst to everybody else, Lord Featherington has a terrible gambling problem. And so the storyline that we see, which leads to further storylines along the seasons, sees him rig a boxing match.
Yeah.
And win a bet. You know, he's been obviously like accumulating all of these gambling debts. He's desperate. He rigs a boxing match. He gets found out and he's murdered. And then his wife and sort of his children are left to pick up all of the pieces.
Yeah.
And I think there's a couple of things that we want to talk about here. The first is gambling addiction and just how destructive it can be. And, you know, Lord Featherington is shown as quite a ridiculous character, but the underlying kind of issue is really serious and it's really prevalent today. So.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder as well, like how many people are in that situation where, like, I imagine what's happened is that he like has facilitated this lifestyle for the family through, you know, legitimate or illegitimate means, but then has that pressure to keep that up and to maintain that for the family. And like, if he can't then do that through legitimate means, he's turned to these illegitimate ways of doing it through gambling, through fixing the matches. And ultimately, like, it all comes crumbling down. And it does just make you wonder, like, does this happen a lot more in real life as well than we see, where people are getting themselves into that situation and you're basically like, your lifestyle is so expensive and there are these expectations and you don't have anywhere to turn, like, really, to tell anyone or to get out of it. And obviously, again, back in these days, like early 1800s, then he's the breadwinner. He's the sole source of income to run the house. So it's not like he can say to Lady Featherington, oh, can you go and do some work?
Yeah.
Really, he's got to figure it all out by himself. But ultimately what ends up happening is he doesn't. And then he's murdered and then they're left to figure it out anyway.
Yeah. And it catalyzes the events of the next two seasons of, like, in season 2, there's this whole, like, this cousin comes from America and he and Portia, so Lady Featherington, are trying to, like, scam people into investing in these fake ruby mines, and then he gets found out and flees, and then but Portia keeps the money, and then in season 3 is kind of using that to fund their lifestyle again, so that they've kind of restored their standing. But then there's this solicitor who's come and is, like, investigating the source of the money, because she's just said, like, some aunt died somewhere, and that all ends up getting wrapped up. I think it, like, entwines with the Lady Whistledown storyline, which like, spoiler alert, this is a genuine spoiler, is that Penelope Featherington is Lady Whistledown. I can't remember when this is revealed. End of season 2?
I think it's the end of season 2.
Yeah. She has been earning a fortune. Yeah. This is all these people have to read, apparently. And the Queen is, you know, an avid reader, and uses her, like, legitimately earned money to bail the family out, and then happens to also marry Colin Bridgerton, and then has a son who can then inherit the title and all of the assets that go with that. So it's all wrapped up very, very neatly, but it is a kind of 3-season arc of, like, financial ruin, which is all set off by, like you said, like, the actions of a man who was clearly really desperate and under so much pressure. And, you know, gambling addiction is one of the most serious things. Like, we actually talked in the last episode when we did Confessions of a Shopaholic about, you know, shopping addiction, how serious that can be, and also how it can affect men. But I think gambling addiction, it you know, is so much more prevalent in men, potentially for the reasons that you discussed. But we see it everywhere. I mean, there's, like, even professional footballers who aren't allowed to bet on football for obvious reasons, because they can influence the outcomes, have been, you know, given bans. My whole family are Newcastle supporters. They had a player who they just signed who then was immediately banned for 10 months. Sandro Tonali for betting on matches. Ivan Toney, similar. And I think sometimes it's that thing of, like, not knowing what you're getting into, and then you can't stop.
I think there's something that's really, like, icky about, like, the position and the power of gambling companies in this country, because, like, we all know, I don't think anyone's going to pretend to not think that gambling is, like, a problem. Like, it's, even if people try to kind of downplay it and make it into, like, oh, you know, I'm only going to put a bet on here, £5, £10, they're like, ultimately, like, the scale of the problem is well known and documented, but the power of the gambling companies when it comes to like both money and politics is so much that ultimately like they have got quite a lot of free reign.
Yeah.
And that's something that's like not going to change because of those two things. Like they are incredibly valuable as taxpayers, even though a lot of them are like set up in offshore structures. Like they still pay a huge amount of tax.
Yeah, well,
in the UK.
The Bet365 family, they were like in the top 10 taxpayers, weren't they? That was like recently published.
And then like the same, they've in terms of politics, like they have a lot of sway politically, and like ultimately politicians have to think about, you know, our tax receipts and how are they going to fund that. And it's similar with other industries as well, which are like questionable. But I do think that like the level of like freedom that gambling companies still have when it comes to advertising, particularly around sport, is quite wild. Like it is absolutely everywhere. Whenever you watch any live sport, like it's on like the adverts on the TV, it's on the shirts, it's on like the billboards around the pitch. And like that's just like that has just become quite normal. And I don't really see how that's ever going to change that much. Like, yes, there's some more disclaimers, but is that stopping anybody?
No, it's really horrifying actually, because it's not just even within the sport. It's like celebrities related to the sport are often like spokespeople. So like I really like Peter Crouch, but he's a spokesperson for like Sky Bet or whatever it is. And I don't know if we've said this on the podcast before, but like the one place where I draw the line is I would just never work with a betting company. And, you know, we want to have this podcast funded for a long time. But even if we were having to fund it ourselves, I think like if like a betting company offered, we would just be like, no, sorry. Because I think it is just everywhere and it becomes so normalized. But then something that like should really make you sit up and think is that, again, all I know about football is Newcastle United, but they had a season where they were like completely beleaguered by injuries, and so they had to pull a 17-year-old academy player. And if you are under 18, you can't wear a shirt with a gambling sponsor on it. So like if we're trying to protect under 18s from this, it's like an admission of knowing that it's a problem. Absolutely.
But then I also wonder with someone like Peter Crouch, it's like if your whole career you've been advertising it on your shirt anyway, like what's the difference in signing a big contract to carry on advertising it? Like it must really blur the lines and like because it's so normal.
I suppose so much stuff is gambling at its essence. Like I was listening to a really interesting interview with Anne Pettifor because she's got a new book out that's called The Global Casino, which is all about how the whole stock market is basically just a big casino. Like it's all gambling. But I think, you know, the obviously that is kind of on a real macro level. And like, you know, if you're just investing in stocks and shares, like you don't need to think about it that way. But if you're following a crypto bro and they're like telling you that you can earn this much from like the volatility of the market or whatever, then that can be like really akin to gambling as well.
I mean, yeah, like when you actually start to think about it in more detail, like the lines do start to blur, I think more and more. And like, you know, we work in a space where we're very much like supportive and encouraging of investing, but like you say, within kind of like sensible confines. But there is a lot of investing that is much more like gambling, like when you're talking about things like trading. And I also think that what is kind of an extra factor that often doesn't get talked about is the fact that, you know, there are some types of gambling where like the outcome is more natural. Like you can't predict what's going to happen. But there are other areas where it's like ripe for rigging. Like we said, like sports, like there's a lot of kind of, I guess, protection around that. And there should be as well in like the financial services industry. But again, there are so many stories of like insider trading and like things being leaked. And I know it's in the news at the moment, like where, we're talking about whether like some of the government information about like assets that they're going to sell,
secrets.
have been like given to other people, which is then going to affect the stock markets and all of that stuff. So it's like, as much as these things like may or may not be riskier or not risky, like you never quite know who's behind them and what they're doing.
Yeah, and there's other levels of like sort of commercial gambling, because I was just thinking, like, I do the Great Ormond Street lottery, which is basically a monthly donation, but they do a draw every Friday and you can win up to like £1,000. And sometimes I don't even remember to check the like email. But that's like a form of gambling, but it's really different to like if you are compulsively betting on sports. Now, I think, there's, boxing really is one of the sports where, because it comes down to one person. I guess if you're like trying to rig a football match, you've got to convince like 11 players or at least a couple to like, throw things off. And there's other influences at play. But with a boxing match, it's one-on-one. But I do just think like so much more could be done to help people, and if you're listening, it's like the responsible thing for us to do. If you're listening and this is like ringing a bell for you, whether it is like betting on sport or whether it's even like compulsively doing the lottery and spending like a fortune on that, you can find support at Gamble Aware, and there are like tools available to help you that kind of sit outside the just like when the fun stops, stop, the like disclaimer that these companies have to use.
Yeah. I think though, on that topic, but kind of going back to the storyline, like it's something that happens a lot still today, where you have somebody who is like running the household a lot of the time and something happens to them and like it can really leave a family completely in the lurch. And like both in terms of like finances, but also just in terms of like knowing what's going on. And I think it kind of really highlights like the risk of like relying on one person to run all of like any aspect of your household, to be honest. And I think, I've seen this happen in real life, like as well, like not just like on the TV, where somebody passes away and then like their spouse is left like trying to deal with all the paperwork, and like it can take years in some situations to deal with it. And I think understanding like your situation, making sure that you know what's going to happen if that happened, like if you or your partner suddenly passed away, like that's so important. And I just wonder like how many people actually feel like they're in a position to do that.
Yeah, I've started doing it. I've got a like folder with "If I Die, Start Here" on the front of it. I've been posting about it on my Instagram because I think it is just like really important to know what to put in there, because there's the things that you might like think of, like life insurance, your will, obviously, stuff like that. But there's also like account logins and passwords and things to cancel, and also like some of the more touchy-feely stuff, right? Like one of the things so my dad died when I was 20. I always wish that I had like a final like letter from him, even if it was just literally like a couple of lines long. So I think, it doesn't always have to be super sort of morbid or impersonal. It can be quite like life affirming. And I have found that as I've been like starting to put mine together, is that it just how you get peace of mind, your family get peace of mind. Like it's a really, really good thing to do. Alas, that has not happened to Lady Featherington. She's been left with an absolute ton of debt. And that also does happen in real life, is that like sometimes it's just the admin, but sometimes someone dies and you suddenly uncover lots of things that have been going wrong.
It is actually very interesting, this point. So I looked into this as to what happens nowadays, and obviously it was probably quite different back in the 1800s. But what happens if your partner, your spouse, a family member dies with a lot of debt, and the surviving relatives do not actually become responsible for that debt. So you can't inherit debt, but the debt has to be paid from the estate. And I guess ultimately, like if you're relying on that estate to then be yours and a load of debt that you weren't anticipating has to come out of the estate first, then that can leave you in a really difficult situation.
Yeah.
And this ties back as well really closely to like how you own property. And I think, again, a lot of people maybe don't think about this. And this may be controversial, but like there's been this big movement towards, you know, keeping everything separate. And I know we've talked about this before. But again, this is another area where it's really risky to have your house as tenants in common rather than in joint tenancy. Obviously, there are pros and cons to both.
So joint tenancy is where you own it together.
Yeah.
And tenants in common is where you each own a specific proportion. Yeah.
Exactly. Because if you're joint tenants, if one of you passes away, because you own it together, it just becomes the property of the other person, which means that in this situation, it doesn't become part of the estate. So your house is safe from debt collectors, etc. Whereas if you're tenants in common, the half that was owned by the person that's died is still their half and becomes part of their estate.
Yeah.
So it can then be accessed by debt collectors, which then means that you're vulnerable in that situation. So I think it's something that, again, I never really thought about, like as being a consequence of that decision of which one to do when you're purchasing.
Yeah, because actually quite often tenants in common is framed as a way of protecting what's yours. For example, if one of you has contributed the entire deposit and especially if that's been like a family gift.
Yeah.
Actually, it shouldn't be, especially like if you've worked really hard for it, it should be even more so. But I just mean in terms of like sometimes family have conditions on gifting that to you. It's seen as like a way of protecting what's yours. Whereas in actual fact, like it can also leave you vulnerable on the other side.
And I think it's worth just thinking, like if you are in that situation, like looking at other ways that you can protect that money, like having like deeds of trust or whatever, or looking at drawing up agreements outside of that to protect your deposit, for example, so that you can avoid that situation. But it's just something that I have learned whilst researching this that I wasn't really aware of before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, we have to also remember that all of this is going to be like entangled with all of the grief and really raw emotions that you're going to have after someone's died anyway. And also I'd say quite often, if this is the situation, it will be the case that the person has died quite suddenly. And so I've seen quite a few like bits and pieces of interviews from Ramesh Ranganathan and his brother, because a similar thing happened to them. Their dad died very suddenly and a big financial mess was uncovered. And the aftermath of that like really drove a wedge between the two of them as brothers, you know. So I think there's as with everything to do with finance, especially to do with like money and family, there's so much more to it than just the actual problem of the financial mess. It's all of the like, ripple effects and emotions. But you know, like my grandparents, they were together from when they were in their early 20s, and when my granddad died at 94, they had never had a joint bank account. So like it's just stuff like that. And so his accounts were then in probate, and you know, it's just trying to have a handle on things. And you know, my granddad's death, while like all of us have been, are and were so desperately sad about it, wasn't unexpected.
No.
He was 94. You know, and there was so much admin to do around that. And, you know, it's a lot of it's still ongoing, like around his pension, around all of this stuff. So yeah, just having things neat and tidy. You know, he was not like a disorganized man, like, and they were, you know, there wasn't anything to uncover, but it's still really stressful.
Yeah, there's no like centralized system, which I'm baffled by, that there's not like one service or someone hasn't come up with a way to like streamline all of this like after death process.
Oh, maybe we should.
Yeah, maybe this is our next business idea. I mean, moving on to like a slightly different subject, one of the things that we see happening in this series of Bridgerton is effectively a maid war. And I love this because I think it's a really fascinating insight into something that like has also translated into like modern day as well, that we see happening.
I literally was like messaging you as I was watching it, being like, there's such a good storyline for us to talk about in this season, because it is, we can like really use it as a metaphor for things that might actually be happening in people's lives and might actually really help them to negotiate. But yeah, like what essentially happens is that, and it does tie in with the main storyline. So Sophie, who's our like female romantic lead this season, she goes to the masquerade ball where she is promptly fallen in love with by Benedict Bridgerton. She's wearing like a very small mask across half of her face. So, of course, she's completely unrecognizable.
Of course.
She's got no other features apart from fear. But anyway, we see her go home, and it transpires that she is actually maid to her stepmother and her stepsisters. And it's kind of complex. Like her stepmother is quite cruel, but there has, like you get the impression actually this is another situation where a patriarch has died and things have been uncovered. So like there's no provision in his will for Sophie, even though she's his daughter. Her mother was a maid. And so the best that her stepmother can do is to sort of keep her, make sure she's fed and clothed and has a salary as a maid. But they find out that she has been to the ball and she is promptly sacked. And this creates a vacancy and one that they're desperate to fill. So they offering higher wages from another household. And this kicks off this whole maid wars where maids are suddenly able to demand higher wages and they're moving from family to family to family.
Yeah. And I think what it's fascinating is it shows like how I guess one decision in like a market can then like have a real domino effect on other areas of the market. Like, because effectively these households, that is what they are. They're like mini businesses. They've got their own staff, and what one family decides to do is going to then have this impact on the others. And I guess in a situation like where you're a maid, a lot of the time you probably don't feel like you're able to ask for more. It's just that this specific situation and like ultimately, I guess, the demand and the desperation to fill that space then creates this like, I guess ultimately like that there is a demand that is higher than the supply. And so they've got to try and attract people. And it's something that like we do see happen in different industries. And I mean, the kind of classic example at the moment of it is in city US, particularly law firms, like wages have absolutely skyrocketed because of this, because partly a lot of the firms have come over from America and so pay US based salaries, but there's also a fight basically for the best graduates. And the way that they're trying to get them is by out competing each other with salaries. So it's meant that you're seeing salaries for like 24-year-olds that are like 150, 160,000 pounds. And that's purely because, there is this race to try and get as many of like the best people as possible, using money as the kind of, I guess, carrot to try and get them in.
Yeah, and I think like, you know, not to draw comparisons between like a Regency maid and a corporate.
I think there are actually quite a lot of comparisons, to be honest.
But they're very demanding roles and quite ruthless as well, I think. And so you have to sort of know what you're getting yourself into. And I suppose as someone who like started a law career and then decided to go in a different direction, you're probably quite like well placed to talk to us about that.
Yeah. And I mean, I like went in and left at like, I mean, a early stage in the career. So I hadn't really got to the point where like the money was silly. That being said, like for a graduate salary when I started, like it was very high pay, but it was nothing like what it's got to these days. But I know a lot of lawyers, like I'm married to a lawyer, like a lot of my friends are lawyers. And the reality is like it is savage. Like I know that a lot of people would say, well, yeah, like I would do that for that money. But I don't think that many people realise quite how extreme it is. Like you're being paid that much money to give up the rest of your life ultimately, and to be on beck and call, to work 20-hour days. Like,
I was going to say it's the availability thing as well, of like it's expected that if you get a phone call at 11:30 p.m, you will answer.
And we were talking about this the other day, me and my husband, because it was a very normal thing that like city lawyers start quite late compared to other jobs. Like not many people are in the office at like 7 a.m. But it's because when you get to the office, like you don't know when you're leaving. Like you might be leaving at like 9. If it's a good day, you might be leaving at 11. You might be leaving at 3 or 4 a.m. Like, so starting at 9 or 9:30 is kind of like irrelevant. Like you just are going to be there as long as you're going to be there.
I'm literally tired just thinking about it.
It's like, it's wild. And like even there are some amazing like people that I know that are still lawyers and that have like done really well in their careers, but also a lot of them are like at the point in their early 30s where they've had enough already and are like, I don't want to do this. Like this has taken over my life for so long. And I understand why a lot of people do it. Kind of, you know, the maids, I'm sure, are in a similar situation. If they've got the opportunity to like for a few years make a lot of money, like put it aside for themselves and then like go on to something else later. I can understand that, but you have to be prepared like for those years that is a sacrifice that you're going to make. I don't know if you've seen this, and we probably will talk about this more when we talk about industry later in the series, hopefully, but there are a couple of like Instagram accounts which are like investment bankers in the US and like it's kind of like this weird like voyeurism because it's like a day in the life, but it's so depressing. Like they literally record their day in the life and the whole day is basically them at their laptops. Like, and they do the timestamps and stuff. And people are literally like commenting like, is this a life? Like,
Is this like on a loop?
Like, are you okay?
Yeah.
And it's like 4:30 a.m. doing notes for clients. Like, and it's like this weird, like, because I just don't think sometimes you join the dots between like what is actually required to earn those amounts of money.
And like also, let's face it, there are some people earning massive salaries by doing almost fuck all, but it definitely isn't those. It's not
those
people.
Jobs. Yeah, it's probably like the CEOs who are like flying around having coffee,
playing golf.
But
I mean, like, you know, maids obviously at this point worked incredibly hard and were like often really underappreciated. But there is an amazing scene. So obviously this Maid Wars backdrop is going on. None of the Bridgerton maids are leaving because they've all got their like little cute purple outfits and it's like a well-oiled machine. But Varley, who is the housekeeper, kind of sort of like, I guess, head maid for the Featherington household, and she's having to look after, because I'm pretty sure that Penelope and Colin live in their own house, but I think the other two girls still live with their husbands in the household and like babies. So she's having to look after like these very pampered and not like particularly bright people. Although like Portia, I think, is very canny, but the other two are sort of like funny airheads, aren't they? But yeah, so she's like been very dedicated. She's been with them for a very long time. She raises with Lady Featherington the fact that higher salaries are on offer, basically saying like the market rate for my work has gone up. I would like a pay rise. And instead of giving her a pay rise, what Lady Featherington does is goes and gets some of her old dresses, which are 2 seasons out of date. She's like, only 2 seasons out of date. And like offers that to her instead of a pay rise, and kind of says, you know, we're not in the financial position to give you a pay rise, but
here's a perk.
Here's a perk. It really reminded me of like corporate perk culture, where they're like, look, we can't give you a pay rise, but how do you feel about yoga? How do you feel about
an Amazon voucher?
Yeah, absolutely. And like, you know, some of those things have value. I was talking to my husband about this because every job that he's worked at before, you got your birthday off, or most jobs. And in his new company, it's really great, but you don't get your birthday off by default. You have to book it off. And we were talking about the fact that actually that's one perk that does mean quite a lot to people. But the flip side of that is that his company pay incredibly generously.
Yeah.
They have a really good like bonus structure. They have really good training and development. Like, you know, and I said to him, like, you can just book your birthday off. Like this,
take the holiday.
This essence of like a good job where you feel cared for and looked after and well remunerated is worth a lot of those like quite meaningless perks.
Yeah.
But yeah, he did say that birthdays off is something that like means quite a lot to people. So, you know, it's potentially something that they could introduce. But yeah, corporate perk culture is very, very like funny to me.
Yeah.
I've had some decent perks at jobs in the past. So like I worked for an interiors company and we used to have staff sales and like almost
That's
like
nice.
we're just kind of we've just phased out our table that I got for 20 quid at a staff sale, but it was like so really lovely, beautiful.
I do always think like when you work for a good company and you get like a good discount, that's like winning. Like my stepdad he does like a few shifts at the local Sainsbury's and they get like really good discounts. And like when you look at the cost of your food shop, I would happily like take that, like the value. And it's like TFL as well. I could go on about this for hours, but TFL, if you work for TFL, you, I think, and a family member often get an Oyster card as a part of like the deal. And that's worth like £170 a month.
Yeah, I do think that some perks, especially when it comes to like discounts, can actually act as like supplement to your salary.
Well, yeah, because it bridges the gap, doesn't it?
We talked about this with journalism before as well, didn't we? Of like the freebies kind of can top up your salary because it's stuff that you don't have to then buy. But yeah, no. But on the other side of it, this like dresses instead of pay.
Old dresses.
She was like, you know, oh, you can wear them on your day off. And she's like, well, there's no point in me having a day off because I don't have any money to like go and do anything. And ultimately that ends in her moving to work for, of course, she's gone to work for like evil stepmom and the evil stepsisters, because that ties in very neatly with the story. But so
sometimes the money matters and you've got to go where the money is.
And sometimes you have to like call your employer's bluff. But I would say if you've got another offer on higher pay, and you're going in to sort of say, look, I've got this other offer, but I'd rather stay here, you kind of do have to be prepared to leave. Yeah. You know, I'd love for us to do like a bit of a deep dive on negotiating at some point.
We definitely
I have a lot to learn. I've some to contribute, but I have a lot to learn.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that kind of brings us to the end of chatting about those bits of Bridgerton. I'm sure that as time goes on, other stuff will come up. So maybe we'll do a part 2 sometime. But,
definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening or watching. We hope you've enjoyed the show. As always, please do subscribe, follow, leave us a review, and let us know if there's anything that you would like us to cover in the coming weeks.
Yep, you can also find us on Substack. Just search for Show Me the Money. And we're at Show Me the Money Official on Instagram and TikTok. And
we'll see you next week.
Bye.